Okay, last factor that I want to talk about that affects stroke volume is what we call venous return. Venous return is the amount of blood returning to the atria from the veins. Okay, and it's super important because a huge portion of our total blood volume is in the veins. About 60% of our total blood volume is in the veins. So you can imagine that if we can manage to get that blood out of the veins and back into our heart, we can then pump some of that blood out of the heart every time we pump, every time our heart pumps. So we can increase our stroke volume if we can just get that blood out of the veins and into the heart so that we can pump it out of the heart. Okay. Venous return is affected by these three factors here: the skeletal muscle pump, the respiratory pump, and sympathetic innervation. I'm going to talk about each of these in turn. So let's start with the skeletal muscle pump. Okay, so basically what the skeletal muscle pump is it's based on the fact that many of our veins are uh, embedded among our skeletal muscles. And as we move our bodies, as we contract our skeletal muscles, that contraction of our muscles is going to compress our veins, and that's going to propel blood back to our heart. Okay, so that's the skeletal muscle pump. And I just want to point out, I'm sure you've heard that, if you're spending all day in front of your computer, which you might be able to relate to right now, or if you're on like a long bus ride or car ride or plane ride, you're supposed to get up and walk around every once in a while to improve your circulation. This is what you're doing. You are activating your skeletal muscle pump, right? You're contracting your skeletal muscles so that you can propel your blood out of your veins and back to your heart, so that it can re-enter, well, not really re-enter because it's in, but kind of distribute it more evenly across your circulation. Okay. Okay, next factor that's going to affect venous return is the respiratory pump. So I'm not going to go into great detail about this here, but what I want to say is that as we breathe, um, during some parts of our breathing, we create a subatmospheric pressure in the thoracic cavity. Okay. When we create a subatmospheric pressure in our thoracic cavity, that increases the pressure difference between our veins and the thoracic cavity. And that helps draw blood up to towards our heart. So towards the thoracic cavity. Okay. Okay. Last thing that's going to affect venous return is sympathetic innervation. Okay. So the sympathetic nervous system is going to cause vasoconstriction, so constriction of the veins, okay? And that's going to increase pressure on the veins, which then is going to propel blood back to the heart, okay? So just to summarize, we have our skeletal muscle pump, we have our respiratory pump, and we have sympathetic innervation all working to increase our venous return, to bring that blood back to our heart so that we can then have it available to pump out back to the rest of our body or to the lungs. Okay. Okay. So I just want to remind you that what we're talking about here is we're talking about factors affecting cardiac output. Remember that cardiac output is stroke volume times heart rate. So if we affect either of these factors, stroke volume or heart rate, we're going to affect cardiac output. Okay. We just talked about all of these factors that are going to affect stroke volume. Now I want to spend a moment talking about the factors that affect heart rate. Okay, so as you already know, as I already mentioned before in this lecture, heart rate is regulated by the autonomic nervous system. And I just want you to take a moment now to remind yourselves, what is the effect of sympathetic innervation on heart rate? what is the effect of parasympathetic innervation on heart rate? Okay, so just take a moment. I'll give you a few seconds. Okay, so hopefully you remember sympathetic innervation is going to increase heart rate. That then is going to increase your cardiac output for a given stroke volume. Parasympathetic innervation is going to decrease heart rate, and the effect of that on cardiac output would be to decrease cardiac output for a given stroke volume. Okay, so that just about wraps up this discussion, and it wraps up our discussion of cardiac physiology, actually. I want to close by drawing your attention to this diagram. I'm not going to go over it, but I just want to let you know that it exists. Okay, so there's this diagram called the Wiggers diagram. It's in your book, figure 14.18. It's a really good study tool because it lines up all of the events that are happening in the heart. So you have your ECG, you have pressure changes, you have volume changes, your heart sounds, and the mechanical events of the cardiac cycle all lined up with each other so that you can kind of see how it all fits together.